In the spring of 146 before Christ, a Roman general named Scipio Aemilianus stood on the summit of the Byrsa hill and wept as he watched Carthage burn, a city of 300,000 souls reduced to 6 days of street-by-street slaughter, its 50,000 survivors dragged into slavery, its temples and harbors and towering walls systematically demolished until nothing remained but ash and silence. Beside him stood the historian Polybius, who recorded that Scipio whispered a line from Homer about the fall of Troy, and then said quietly that he feared one day the same fate would come for Rome. How does a civilization powerful enough to make Rome tremble, wealthy enough to control the western Mediterranean from the coast of Africa to the shores of Spain, vanish so completely that for centuries its story survived only in the words of the people who destroyed it? This is the complete story of Carthage, and we will walk through every layer of its extraordinary life. We begin long before the city existed, on a narrow peninsula jutting into the Gulf of Tunis, where 2 natural lagoons and a defensible hilltop created one of the most strategically perfect sites in the ancient world. We will witness the arrival of Phoenician colonists from Tyre, hear the legend of Queen Elissa, who cut an ox hide into strips to claim the hill of Byrsa, and examine the earliest archaeological layers, the modest mud-brick houses and Levantine pottery that confirm settlement from the late 9th century before Christ. We will watch Carthage rise from a small trading post into the undisputed mistress of the Western Sea, commanding colonies from Ibiza to Libya, building triple walls thick enough to stable war elephants within their core, and engineering the Kothon, a circular military harbour sheltering 220 warships in individual covered docks. We will walk the streets of the living city at its height, through workshops and bakeries and multi-story houses with plastered courtyards, past the sacred topet where carved stele marked offerings that still provoke fierce scholarly debate. We will follow Hannibal Barca across the Alps and onto the killing fields of Cannae, and we will stand with the last defenders on the Byrsa as Roman soldiers fought their way upward through burning buildings. We will see the silence that followed, and then the astonishing rebirth when Julius Caesar and Augustus refounded the site as Roman Africa's greatest metropolis, crowned by the largest baths outside Rome itself. And we will follow the city through its final centuries, through Vandal conquest and Byzantine reconquest and Arab destruction, until the ruins vanished beneath soil and modern suburbs, waiting for the archaeologists who would bring them back. What makes Carthage irreplaceable is precisely what makes it haunting. This was a civilization that invented prefabricated shipbuilding, whose navigator Hanno sailed the coast of West Africa, whose agricultural treatise by Margo was so brilliant that Rome itself ordered it translated after the city fell. Yet almost nothing written by Carthaginian hands survives. Nearly everything we know comes filtered through Greek suspicion and Roman hostility. The UNESCO campaign that ran from 1972 to 1992, joined by British, German, American, and Tunisian teams, confirmed the circular harbour, uncovered Punic houses buried beneath Roman fill, and retrieved thousands of cremation urns from the topet. Every artifact pulled from that ground is a fragment of a voice that was almost silenced forever. If you find yourself drawn to complete journeys through the great cities of the ancient world, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Each week we bring back to life a world built in sandstone, bronze, and cedar. Let us begin where every city begins, with the ground itself, and the moment someone looked at a windswept peninsula between two seas and saw the future. Before any wall rises, before any keel is laid, there is only the land and the sea and the question of where they meet most favorably. The Gulf of Tunis opens eastward into the central Mediterranean like a cupped hand, its waters sheltered from the prevailing westerlies by the mountainous Cape Bon Peninsula curving northward. At the Gulf's inner southwestern edge, a low promontory extends into the shallows, not dramatic, not towering, but shaped by geology into something rare. A defensible thumb of land flanked on two sides by coastal lagoons, connected to the mainland by a narrow neck barely 3 kilometers wide. This is the ground that will become Carthage. But for centuries before any city exists here, the promontory waits, its strategic logic legible only to those who read coastlines as texts. The Phoenicians of Tyre and Sidon are such readers. By the 11th century before the Common Era, their cedarwood merchant galleys push steadily westward, driven not by conquest, but by commerce, the need for metals, for new markets, for safe anchorages spaced a day's sailing apart along the African and Iberian coasts, tin from beyond the Pillars of Hercules, silver from the rivers of southern Spain, copper from Sardinia. The central Mediterranean is the hinge of this network, and whoever controls the narrows between Sicily and the African shore commands the passage between the eastern and western basins of the inland sea. The distance from Cape Bon to Sicily is barely 140 kilometers. On clear days, the mountains of one shore are visible from the other. Long before the traditional founding date of 814 before the Common Era, Phoenician traders know this coast intimately. Utica, some 30 kilometers northwest of the future Carthage, is already ancient, its founding placed by tradition in the 12th century before the Common Era. Hadrumetum lies further south along the Tunisian shore. These are not cities in the full sense, but seasonal trading stations, places where Levantine merchants beach their ships, exchange goods with Libyan populations of the interior, take on water and provisions, and wait for favorable winds. The African hinterland behind the Gulf is generous, a broad plain of deep alluvial soil, well watered, capable of producing grain and olives in abundance. The lagoons flanking the promontory offer calm water for beaching vessels and, with modest engineering, the possibility of enclosed harbors. The Byrsa Hill itself rises some 60 meters above sea level, modest by any standard, yet sufficient to command views across the Gulf and inland toward the Tell. Its slopes are limestone, easy to quarry, suitable for building. Fresh water can be gathered in cisterns cut into this same soft rock. The neck of land connecting the promontory to the continent is narrow enough to be fortified, broad enough to permit agriculture and grazing on the peninsula itself in times of siege. No settlement yet marks this ground in the 10th or 9th centuries before the Common Era, but Phoenician ships pass and pass again, their pilots noting the twin lagoons, the sheltered anchorage, the defensible ridge. Somewhere in the harbors of Tyre, in the counting houses of merchants who track every favorable shore from Byblos to Gades, this promontory accumulates significance. It is not the first Phoenician foothold in the West. It is something more considered. When colonists finally come, they will not stumble upon this place. They will choose it with the precision of a people who have spent generations mapping the sea's possibilities. The peninsula waits in Mediterranean light, its lagoons still and silver, its hill bare of any temple or wall, holding the shape of a city that does not yet exist. The legend arrives before the archaeology, as it so often does in the ancient world. Later Greek and Roman writers tell of a Tyrian princess named Elissa, the Romans will call her Dido, who flees her brother's murderous court after he kills her husband for his wealth. She sails west with a retinue of nobles and temple priestesses, touching first at Cyprus, then pressing on to the African shore. The local Libyan king, amused or contemptuous, grants her only as much land as an ox hide can cover. Elissa cuts the hide into strips so thin they encircle the entire hill of Byrsa, a name later writers connect to the Greek word for hide, Byrsa, though the Phoenician root likely means citadel. It is a foundation story about cleverness, about a people who survive not through brute force, but through ingenuity. The traditional date is 814 years before the Common Era. What the earth itself remembers is both more modest and more remarkable. On the southeastern slopes of the Byrsa Hill, and along the low ground near the shore, archaeologists have uncovered settlement layers dating to the late 9th and early 8th centuries before the Common Era. The earliest structures are small, mud brick walls on rubble foundations, single-room dwellings with beaten earth floors, roofed with timber and thatch. These are not the houses of a great city. They are the houses of people making a beginning. Among the debris lie fragments of Phoenician red slip pottery, the distinctive fine ware of the Levantine coast, alongside coarser local wares that suggest immediate contact with indigenous North African populations. Imported amphorae from Tyre and Sidon confirm the lifeline stretching back across the sea. The colonists carry their homeland in clay. The settlement grows along the slopes in no grand plan, but with the organic logic of need, houses clustering near freshwater sources, workshops gravitating toward the shore where boats can be hauled up on the sand. Cisterns are cut into the soft sandstone to capture winter rain, a technology the Phoenicians will perfect over centuries until Carthage becomes a city of 10,000 underground reservoirs. The harbour installations of this earliest phase remain elusive beneath later construction, but the lagoons themselves require little engineering. Ships can be drawn into the shallow inner waters, sheltered from open sea swells by the peninsula's natural arm. By roughly 750 years before the Common Era, something more solemn takes shape in the low ground near the southern shore. The Tophet, a sacred precinct unlike anything in the Greek or Roman world, receives its earliest deposits. Small sandstone urns containing cremated remains, many of them infants and very young children, are buried beneath simple limestone stelae. Some stelae bear the symbol of the goddess Tanit, a triangular figure with raised arms and a disc for a head. Others carry brief Phoenician inscriptions dedicating the contents to Baal, Hammon, and Tanit. Whether these deposits represent child sacrifice, as Greek and Roman writers will later insist with horror, or the ritual burial of children who died naturally, a question that still divides scholars examining the age-at-death profiles of the tiny bones, the Tophet is unmistakably a place of profound religious gravity. It will remain in continuous use for 6 centuries, accumulating thousands of urns in densely packed layers. The city that will one day terrify Rome begins here, in mud brick and red slip clay, and the quiet burial of small urns beneath carved stones. The Byrsa Hill rises above these first modest streets, still largely bare, awaiting the temples and fortifications that later centuries will raise upon it. The twin lagoons receive Phoenician keels carrying Levantine oil, wine, and metalwork. The hinterland beyond the isthmus, fertile and watered, begins to yield its grain to these newcomers who have planted themselves at the center of the sea. Cartagina, the new city, is not yet great, but it is alive, and it is growing, and the ox-hide bargain, whether memory or myth, has claimed its hill. And then Tyre falls. In 585 before the Common Era, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian armies begin a siege of the mother city that will grind on for 13 years. The great Phoenician metropolis, pressed against the sea, can no longer project power westward. Its colonies must fend for themselves, and the colony that rises to fill the vacuum is the one planted on the Byrsa promontory, Cartagina, already a century and a half old, already wealthy, already positioned at the hinge of the sea. What happens over the next 2 centuries is not merely survival, it is transformation. Carthage ceases to be a daughter city and becomes a capital. The harbors deepen, the walls begin to climb. Merchant fleets that once carried Tyrian goods now carry Carthaginian ambition to every shore the western Mediterranean touches. The expansion is systematic. Ibiza receives a permanent Carthaginian settlement by the mid-7th century, securing the sea lane between Iberia and Sardinia. Along the North African coast, trading posts multiply. Hadrumetum, Leptis Magna, Sabratha, Thapsus, each one a node in a network that funnels grain, ivory, gold dust, and animal hides toward the Byrsa. In Sardinia, Carthaginian presence hardens from commercial contact into territorial control. In western Sicily, the old Phoenician foundations at Motia, Panormus, and Soluntum come under Carthaginian protection and then Carthaginian authority. The western Mediterranean becomes, in practical terms, a Carthaginian lake. The dynasty that orchestrates much of this expansion bears the name Magonid. Under Mago and his descendants, Carthage professionalizes its military, drawing on Libyan infantry, Numidian cavalry, Balearic slingers, and Iberian mercenaries, a multinational force bound not by citizenship, but by pay and contract. The Magonids also formalize Carthage's political institutions, the 2 Sufetes who serve as annual chief magistrates, the Council of Elders, the Popular Assembly. Power is oligarchic, mercantile, and pragmatic. The reach extends beyond the Mediterranean itself. Ancient sources record that Hanno the Navigator leads a fleet of 60 pentaconters carrying 30,000 colonists down the Atlantic coast of Africa, founding settlements and encountering landscapes of fire and forest that may correspond to the coast of modern Cameroon. His contemporary Hamilcar sails northward into the Atlantic, probing the tin routes toward Brittany and perhaps the British Isles. These expeditions are not exploration for its own sake. They are commercial reconnaissance, the search for metals, for dyes, for markets beyond Greek reach. By 509 before the Common Era, Carthage is powerful enough to negotiate a formal treaty with the young Roman Republic. Polybius preserves its terms. Rome agrees to stay out of Carthaginian waters beyond a defined line near the Gulf of Tunis. Carthage acknowledges Roman interests in Latium. The treaty reveals 2 powers that do not yet fear each other, dividing the sea with the confidence of equals who expect never to collide. But collision comes first with the Greeks. Syracuse, the mightiest Greek city in the west, contests Carthaginian control of Sicily with increasing ferocity. In 480 before the Common Era, at Himera on Sicily's northern coast, a vast Carthaginian army under Hamilcar, a Magonides, meets the forces of Gelon of Syracuse. The battle is catastrophic for Carthage. Hamilcar dies, his army is shattered, and Carthaginian ambitions in eastern Sicily are checked for 70 years. Greek tradition places Himera on the same day as Salamis, where the Persian fleet fell to Athens, as though the civilized world defeated barbarism on two fronts simultaneously. Yet Himera does not break Carthage. The city absorbs the defeat, pays its indemnity, and turns inward, consolidating its African hinterland, strengthening its commercial grip on Sardinia and Iberia, rebuilding its fleet. The temples on the Byrsa grow richer. The Tophet accumulates its silent layers. The harbors handle more tonnage with each generation. The mother city Tyre, diminished under Persian rule, watches its daughter surpass it in every measure of wealth and power. The colony has become the empire, and the Western Sea answers to Carthaginian keels. The western approach is the wound in Carthage's geography. Every other direction offers water, the Gulf to the east, lagoons to the north and south, the open sea beyond. But to the west, a broad isthmus connects the Byrsa Peninsula to the African mainland, and across that flat ground any army could march in column, any siege train could roll forward without impediment. The Carthaginians know this. After Himera, after the humiliation of defeat, and the long decades of quiet rebuilding, the city turns its wealth and engineering intelligence toward solving the problem of that exposed flank. What rises there, over the course of the 5th and 4th centuries before the Common Era, is one of the most formidable defensive systems the ancient world will ever produce. The Roman historian Appian, writing centuries later but drawing on eyewitness accounts from the final siege, describes a triple line of walls stretching across the isthmus, each wall over 30 feet high and roughly 30 feet thick, faced in massive ashlar blocks of local sandstone. The outermost wall carries a parapet and battlements. Behind it, a second wall. Behind that, the innermost and tallest barrier, its enormous thickness honeycombed with internal chambers. Within this third wall's lower levels stand stables for 300 war elephants, their fodder stored in adjacent magazines. Above the elephant stalls, stabling for 4,000 horses and granaries for their feed. Higher still, barracks sufficient for 20,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry, with arsenals for their weapons. The wall is not merely a wall. It is a self-contained military installation, a fortress stretched into a line. Towers punctuate the circuit at intervals of roughly 60 meters, each one projecting forward to allow flanking fire along the wall face. The gates are deep, angled passages designed to trap attackers in killing zones. Archaeological work beneath the heavy Roman construction that later buried the Punic levels has confirmed portions of this system. Massive foundation courses of dressed sandstone, oriented precisely where Appian places them, their scale consistent with his extraordinary description. Behind these defenses, the city breathes and builds upward. The Byrsa Hill, rising 60 meters above the harbors, becomes the sacred Acropolis. At its summit stands the great temple of Eshmun, the healing god, its platform cut into the living rock and faced with finely jointed ashlar masonry. Excavations have revealed this platform's retaining walls, enormous blocks fitted without mortar, their surfaces still bearing the quarry marks of Punic masons. Nearby rise sanctuaries to Tanit, face of Baal, the great goddess whose symbol, a triangle topped by a circle, arms outstretched, appears on thousands of stelae across the city. And to Baal Hammon himself, lord of the brazier, whose cult demands offerings the ancient world will never stop debating. The residential quarters cascade down the Bursa's slopes in dense, multi-story blocks. Houses of 5 and 6 levels crowd narrow streets barely wide enough for a laden donkey. Each house centers on a small interior courtyard open to the sky, its plastered walls channeling rainwater into deep, bottle-shaped cisterns cut into the bedrock beneath the foundations. The cisterns are essential. Carthage has no river, no natural spring adequate to its population. Every drop of water is caught, stored, rationed. The plaster lining of these cisterns, a distinctive Punic hydraulic cement mixed with crushed terracotta, remains watertight after 24 centuries. The air in these streets carries the smoke of metalworkers' forges, the sharp chemical bite of the murex dye vats near the shore, the dust of sandstone being dressed for yet another building project. The city is growing toward its peak population of 300,000, one of the largest urban concentrations in the Mediterranean world, rivaled only by Syracuse and the great cities of the eastern kingdoms. From the summit of the Bursa, looking west past the temple rooflines, the triple wall stretches across the horizon like a man-made ridge. It is the most expensive single construction project Carthage has ever undertaken, and it will stand for nearly 3 centuries. When the Romans finally breach it, they will need 3 years of siege and the greatest general of their age to do so. The wall is a statement written in sandstone and military logic. This city intends to endure. Below the walls, below the temples, below even the residential quarters climbing the Byrsa's southern slopes, the true engine of Carthaginian power lies at sea level. 2 basins, carved from the coastal lagoons and lined with dressed sandstone, form the most sophisticated harbor complex in the ancient Mediterranean world. They are not natural anchorages improved by breakwaters, as at Piraeus or Syracuse. They are entirely artificial, excavated from marshy ground, shaped by human design, connected to the open gulf by a single narrow channel that can be closed with iron chains. The outer basin is rectangular, measuring roughly 456 meters in length and 356 meters in width. This is the commercial port, the Emporion, where merchant vessels from every corner of the Western Sea discharge their cargoes. Along its quays, amphorae of Spanish silver ore stand beside bales of African ivory, jars of garum from the Strait of Gibraltar, ingots of Sardinian copper, and bundles of Iberian esparto grass. Warehouses line the perimeter, their stone foundations still traceable beneath later Roman construction. The smell here is of pitch, brine, hemp rope, and the sharp mineral tang of freshly smelted metal. A channel at the Emporion's inner end leads to the second basin, and here the character of the space changes entirely. The military harbor is circular, approximately 325 meters in diameter, and at its center rises an island connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway. This is the Admiralty Island, from whose elevated platform the commanding admiral can survey every dock simultaneously. Radiating outward from the island and lining the circular quay are 220 individual ship sheds, covered slipways of timber and stone, each sized to shelter a single warship hauled stern first from the water. The rooflines slope upward from the water's edge, supported by Ionic columns, creating a continuous colonnade that rings the basin like a crown. Each shed protects a quinquereme or trireme from sun and rain, keeping the hull timbers dry and light, ready for rapid launch. Archaeologists working under Henry Hurst in the 1970s confirmed the harbour's circular plan and identified the Admiralty Island's hexagonal foundation. They found construction marks on sandstone blocks, Punic letters serving as assembly guides, evidence that components were prefabricated at quarry sites and fitted together at the harbour with extraordinary precision. The shipbuilding itself follows Phoenician tradition refined over centuries. Hulls are built shell first, edge-joined planks locked together with mortise and tenon joints, the frames inserted afterward to stiffen the completed shell. Bronze rams are cast separately and fitted to reinforced bows. A single quinquereme requires roughly 6,000 individual timbers, 70 tons of seasoned pine and fir, and 300 oarsmen to drive it. Carthage maintains a standing fleet of this scale, 220 warships ready for sea, a permanent naval force unmatched until the Roman Republic builds its own fleet by copying a captured Carthaginian vessel, plank by plank. The channel connecting both harbours to the Gulf is barely 20 meters wide. In peacetime, it bustles with traffic. In war, it becomes a choke point no enemy fleet can force. From the open sea, the military harbour is invisible, screened by the commercial port and the city's outer walls. Foreign merchants entering the Emporium see only warehouses and quays. The war fleet remains hidden, a coiled force behind stone and water. This is the infrastructure of thalassocracy. Not merely ships, but the industrial capacity to build, maintain, shelter, and launch them at speed. The Kothan transforms Carthage from a wealthy trading city into a naval superpower capable of projecting force from the Pillars of Heracles to the shores of Sicily. Every timber, every bronze fitting, every coil of rope stored in these sheds represents the surplus of an empire funneled into a single circular basin of dark water, waiting. Above the harbours, above the warehouses and the rope walks and the bronze foundries, the city breathes. 300,000 lives pressed onto a peninsula no more than 3 kilometers long, stacked in houses that climb the southern and eastern slopes of the Byrsa like terraces cut into living rock. This is Carthage not as fortress or fleet base, but as home, the dense, layered, water-scarce, sun-hammered place where people are born, eat, work, pray, and die. The German excavations of the 1970s and 80s revealed the quarter now called the Hannibal district, and what emerged from beneath meters of Roman fill was a city of startling urban sophistication. Streets run in a rough grid, paved with packed earth and crushed sandstone, flanked by drainage channels cut into bedrock. The houses rise 2 and sometimes 3 stories, their ground floors built of carefully dressed sandstone ashlar, upper stories of mud brick over timber frames, the whole surface coated in lime plaster that gleams white under the North African sun. Each house turns inward. Doorways open from the street into narrow corridors that lead to central courtyards open to the sky, the architectural grammar of the Levant transplanted to Africa and adapted to a climate of brutal summers and scarce rainfall. Water defines everything. Beneath nearly every courtyard sits a bottle-shaped cistern carved into the soft tufa, plastered with waterproof lime mortar, collecting every drop that falls on the roof and courtyard surfaces. Channels cut into thresholds and stairways guide rainwater downward. In a city without aqueducts, without rivers, these private cisterns are survival itself. Archaeologists have mapped hundreds of them, their capacity calculated to sustain a household through the long, dry months from May to October. The rooms surrounding each courtyard serve distinct purposes. Ground-floor chambers store amphorae of grain, oil, and salted fish. Kitchens are identifiable by hearth ash, grinding stones of imported basalt, and the carbonized remains of wheat, barley, lentils, figs, and pomegranates. Upper rooms, reached by narrow stone staircases, serve as living and sleeping quarters. Fragments of painted plaster, red, yellow, black geometric patterns survive on interior walls, evidence of domestic decoration that owes much to Hellenistic fashion filtering westward. Beyond the houses, the streets open into small commercial squares. Workshops cluster by trade. Metalworkers leave behind slag, crucible fragments, and bronze droplets fused to stone floors. Dye works are betrayed by the murex shells heaped in refuse pits, thousands of the spiny gastropods crushed to extract the few drops of Tyrian purple that make Carthaginian textiles famous from Iberia to the Aegean. Bakeries show circular millstones and clay ovens. Potters produce the distinctive Punic red slipware, plates, jugs, lamps, and the small terracotta figurines of Tanit that appear in nearly every excavated house. The language of these streets is Punic, a Western dialect of Phoenician written in 22 consonantal letters from right to left. Inscriptions survive on stelae, on pottery stamps, on lead commercial tags. Mago's great agricultural treatise, composed in Punic and later translated into Latin and Greek by Roman order, testifies to a literate culture that produced technical literature of recognized excellence. Yet almost nothing of Punic literature survives in its original form. The libraries burned with the city. What the excavated quarter reveals is a population living at extraordinary density, in houses engineered for climate and scarcity, organized by craft and commerce, connected to trade networks that bring Spanish silver, Attic pottery, Egyptian amulets, and Etruscan bronzes into private homes. The material record speaks of comfort without extravagance, of pragmatic engineering, of a merchant culture that values function and durability. The plaster walls are thick, the cisterns are deep, the drainage works. In the Hannibal quarter, Carthage is not legend or military threat. It is a living city, its rhythms dictated by rain and sun and tide, its streets worn smooth by generations of feet that will leave no other record. South of the harbours, beyond the commercial district where amphorae stack in warehouse shadows, a low-walled precinct opens to the sky. It is older than the triple walls, older than the Kothon, older than any standing monument in the city. The Topet has been accumulating its deposits since approximately 750 before the Common Era. Centuries of small sandstone urns buried beneath carved stelo, layer upon layer, the oldest now resting 4 meters below the surface that Carthaginians of the 3rd century walk upon. The precinct belongs to Tanit, face of Baal, and to Baal Hammon himself, the 2 supreme deities of the Carthaginian pantheon. Tanit's symbol appears on thousands of stelae, a triangle surmounted by a circle, arms raised in benediction or command, flanked by crescent moons and solar discs. The earliest stelae are rough, barely shaped limestone slabs. By the 4th century they have become elaborate carved monuments, some bearing painted stucco, others showing temple facades with Egyptian-influenced columns, lotus capitals, and winged sun discs. The iconographic evolution spans 5 centuries of continuous use. Beneath each stele sits an urn. Within each urn lie cremated remains. Thousands have been excavated since the late 19th century. Estimates range from 6,000 to 20,000 individual deposits across the precinct's full stratigraphic depth. The remains are small. They are overwhelmingly those of the very young. Greek and Roman authors are unequivocal in their accusation. Diodorus Siculus describes a bronze statue of Kronos, their interpretation of Baal Hammon, into whose heated arms living infants were placed, rolling into flames below. Plutarch repeats the charge. Cleitarchos elaborates it. These writers are not neutral observers. They are citizens of states at war with Carthage, or historians writing after Carthage's annihilation, drawing on traditions shaped by centuries of enmity. Modern forensic analysis complicates the picture without resolving it. Osteological studies of urn contents from the 1970s and 80s confirmed that the majority of remains belong to fetuses and neonates, many at or before full term. Some scholars argue this indicates a cemetery for stillbirths and infants who died naturally, consecrated to the gods in a sacred precinct rather than the standard necropolis. Others note that age-at-death patterns do not match expected natural mortality curves, that some urns contain remains of children aged 1 to 3 years, and that the sheer number of deposits, increasing dramatically in periods of crisis, suggests deliberate sacrifice, perhaps of firstborn children, perhaps in fulfillment of vows. The Tophet is not unique to Carthage. Similar precincts appear at Hadrumetum, at Motia in Sicily, at Sulcis and Tharos in Sardinia, wherever Phoenician and Punic communities established themselves in the Western Mediterranean. The practice, whatever its precise nature, belongs to a shared religious tradition spanning centuries and thousands of kilometers. Beyond the Tophet, the dead of Carthage rest in vast necropoles extending along the roads leading from the city gates. Shaft tombs cut into bedrock hold painted sarcophagi, terracotta masks with fixed smiles, glass paste amulets, ostrich eggs painted with geometric designs, and red figure pottery imported from Athens. The funerary world reveals a culture absorbing Egyptian, Greek, and indigenous Libyan influences while maintaining distinctly Phoenician rites. The placement of food offerings, the orientation of the body, the razor-thin bronze implements laid beside the dead. The temples themselves have left almost no trace above the Roman destruction layer. The great sanctuary of Eshmun on the Byrsa summit is known primarily from its massive platform, visible beneath Augustan-era construction fill. Literary sources describe gilded doors, textile hangings, and a priesthood organized into hereditary colleges. Inscriptions record dedications, vow fulfillments, and the titles of religious officials whose authority paralleled that of the Suffet. What the Tophet preserves is not an answer but a question, one that Carthage itself cannot speak to, its religious texts destroyed, its theological explanations silenced in the fires of 146. The urns remain. The stelae stand in museum halls now. Tanit's raised arms repeating across hundreds of stones, each marking a small deposit of it calcined bone that no modern discipline has been able to fully explain. Sicily is the reason Carthage cannot remain only a trading city. The island sits at the center of the Mediterranean like a stone in a doorway, and whoever holds its western harbors controls the passage between the African and European coasts. Carthage has maintained footholds there since the 7th century. Motia on its tiny island in the western lagoons, Panormus with its deep anchorage, Soluntum on its coastal ridge. But the Greek cities of eastern Sicily, above all Syracuse, press westward with the same geographic hunger. The island is too fertile, too strategic, too central for any single power to hold unchallenged. In 480 before the Common Era, the collision becomes catastrophic. At Himera, on Sicily's northern coast, a vast Carthaginian force under Hamilcar meets the combined armies of Syracuse and Acragas. The defeat is total. Hamilcar dies, by his own hand, some ancient sources claim, throwing himself into the sacrificial fire as the battle turns. Carthage withdraws from Sicilian expansion for 70 years. The loss reshapes the city's political order. The Magonid dynasty's grip loosens. Power shifts toward the Council of Elders and the Tribunal of 104, a body designed to check military commanders who might accumulate dangerous authority. But Sicily's gravity is inescapable. In 409, Carthage returns. Hannibal Mago, grandson of the Hamilcar who fell at Himera, sacks Selinus, then Himera itself, razing the city where his grandfather perished. The destruction is methodical. Temples are stripped, populations enslaved, walls demolished to their foundations. Over the following decades, Carthaginian armies push deeper into Sicily, clashing repeatedly with Dionysius I of Syracuse. In 397, Dionysius strikes at the heart of Punic Sicily, Motia. His forces build a causeway to the island fortress and storm it after a brutal siege. The city falls, its population massacred. Carthage never rebuilds Motia. Instead, survivors establish Lilybaeum on the western cape of Sicily, a new stronghold on the mainland, fortified with walls and ditches that will prove nearly impregnable for centuries. The wars grind on through the 4th century. Carthaginian armies in Sicily are composed increasingly of mercenaries, Libyan infantry, Iberian swordsmen, Balearic slingers, Campanian cavalry, Sardinian skirmishers, bound not by citizenship but by silver. This polyglot military machine is effective but volatile. Commanders must pay on time or face mutiny. The logistics of feeding and supplying these forces across the open sea from Africa to Sicily strain even Carthage's enormous commercial wealth. In 310, the war comes home. Agathocles of Syracuse, besieged in his own city by a Carthaginian army, makes a desperate gamble. He loads his remaining fleet and sails directly for Africa, landing near the Cap Bon Peninsula. For the first time, Carthaginian farmers see enemy soldiers burning their estates, uprooting their orchards, threatening the city's own walls. The campaign lasts 3 years. Agathocles ultimately fails and withdraws, but the shock reverberates through Carthage. The agricultural hinterland, the grain fields and olive groves that feed the metropolis, is vulnerable. A final challenger arrives in 278, Pyrrhus of Epirus, the Greek mercenary king who has already bloodied Rome in southern Italy. He sweeps across Sicily, driving Carthaginian garrisons from nearly every stronghold except Lilybaeum, whose walls and harbour defy his siege engines. But Pyrrhus cannot hold what he takes. His Greek allies quarrel, his troops grow restless, and he withdraws to Italy, reportedly declaring that he leaves Sicily as a wrestling ground for Carthage and Rome. The remark proves prophetic. 2 centuries of Sicilian warfare have hardened Carthage into a military power of formidable reach, its mercenary system refined, its naval dominance tested but intact, its western Sicilian fortresses, Panormus, Lilybaeum, Drepana, still garrisoned and supplied. Yet the wars have also revealed the limits of a commercial empire fighting far from home with hired armies. Across the narrow strait of Messana, a new power watches. Rome's legions have reached the southern tip of Italy. The wrestling ground awaits its final contestants. The Strait of Messana is barely 3 kilometers wide. In 264 before Christ, a dispute over a garrison town on its Sicilian shore draws both powers across that narrow water, and the Mediterranean will never be the same. Carthage holds western Sicily with fortresses tested by 2 centuries of Greek warfare. Rome commands the Italian peninsula with citizen legions that have never fought at sea. The collision begins over Messana, modern Messina, where a band of Italian mercenaries appeals to both powers simultaneously. Roman troops cross the strait. Carthaginian warships already ride at anchor in the harbour. Within months, the local quarrel becomes a war between civilizations. Rome's problem is elemental. Carthage rules the sea. Its quinqueremes, warships with 5 banks of oars, hulls sheathed in lead, bronze rams weighing over 100 kilograms, patrol from Lilybaeum to Sardinia. Rome possesses almost nothing that floats. According to Polybius, the Romans capture a beached Carthaginian warship and reverse engineer it, building 120 copies in 60 days. The timber is Italian oak and pine. The shipwrights work from the Carthaginian vessel like a template, training rowers on benches set up on dry land while the hulls take shape. But copying a ship does not copy seamanship. Rome's answer is the corvus, a heavy boarding bridge with an iron spike at its tip, mounted on a swivel at the prow. When a Roman vessel closes with an enemy, the corvus drops, its spike punching through the deck planking, locking the ships together. The sea battle becomes a land battle. Roman infantry pours across. At Mylae in 260 before Christ, this device shatters Carthaginian naval confidence. 50 warships are lost. The western Mediterranean, Carthage's private sea for 3 centuries, is suddenly contested water. Further Roman victories follow. Sulci, Tyndaris, Ecnomus in 256, where perhaps 700 warships clash in one of antiquity's largest naval engagements. Yet the war grinds on for 23 years. Storms destroy Roman fleets repeatedly. Polybius records the loss of over 500 ships to weather alone. Carthage holds Lilybaeum and Drepana with stubborn garrisons. Hamilcar Barca conducts a brilliant guerrilla campaign in western Sicily's mountains, raiding Roman supply lines, never brought to decisive battle on land. The end comes at sea. In 241 before Christ, off the Ergets Islands near Lilybaeum, a rebuilt Roman fleet intercepts a Carthaginian supply convoy. The Carthaginian ships are overloaded with grain and reinforcements, their crews undertrained. 50 are sunk, 70 captured. The bronze rams of these vessels, recovered from the seabed by marine archaeologists beginning in 2004, bear Punic foundry inscriptions, physical proof of the industrial scale of Carthaginian naval production. Carthage sues for peace. The terms strip away Sicily, impose an indemnity of 3,200 talents payable over 10 years, and forbid Carthaginian warships in Italian waters. Rome seizes Sardinia and Corsica shortly after, exploiting Carthage's weakness during the Mercenary War. That war, the Truculus War, nearly destroys Carthage from within. 20,000 unpaid mercenaries, Libyans, Iberians, Gauls, and Campanians revolt in 241. They seize Tunis, blockade the city, and for 3 years Hamilcar Barca fights a war of extraordinary savagery in the Bagradas Valley. Prisoners are crucified, trampled by elephants, starved in siege camps. Polybius calls it a conflict that surpassed all wars in cruelty. Hamilcar prevails. But the Carthage that emerges from these twin catastrophes, the loss of its island empire and the near destruction by its own soldiers, is a changed city. The commercial harbour still hums with trade. The Cothon still shelters warships. The treasury begins to refill, yet the strategic reality is transformed. Rome now holds the islands, commands the central Mediterranean passages, and has learned to build fleets. The sea belongs to no single power. In the Barcid household, a boy named Hannibal grows toward manhood, and his father's unfinished war becomes the inheritance that will shake the ancient world. Hamilcar takes the boy to Iberia. The peninsula becomes Carthage's new empire, not islands vulnerable to Roman fleets, but a continental mass rich in silver, copper, tin, and warriors. From 237 before Christ, the Barcid family carves out a domain in southern and eastern Spain with the efficiency of kings, though they hold no royal title. Hamilcar dies in battle in 228. His son-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, builds Cartagina, Cart Hadasht, another new city. As the Iberian capital, its harbour a mirror of the African motherland. When Hasdrubal falls to an assassin's blade in 221, the army elevates Hannibal, now 25, to supreme command. He moves fast. In 219, Hannibal besieges Saguntum, a city allied with Rome on the eastern Spanish coast. 8 months of brutal assault reduce it. Rome sends envoys to Carthage demanding Hannibal's surrender. The Senate refuses. War begins again. In the spring of 218 before Christ, Hannibal marches from Cartagena with an army Polybius, numbers at 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. He crosses the Pyrenees, leaving garrisons behind. He crosses southern Gaul, fording the Rhone on rafts while elephants swim beside pontoons. Then he turns toward the Alps. The crossing takes 15 days. Which pass he used remains debated, the Col de Clapier, the Col du Mont-Cenis, others, but the suffering is not in doubt. Early autumn snowfall on high passes, rock slides on narrow tracks, hostile mountain tribes rolling boulders onto the column from above. Polybius, drawing on eyewitness accounts, records that Hannibal descended into the Po Valley with 26,000 men, barely a third of those who left Spain. Most elephants survive the crossing, but will perish in the coming Italian winter. What follows reshapes the ancient world. At the Trebia in December of 218, Hannibal draws the Roman consul Sempronius into a trap. A hidden cavalry force strikes the Roman rear while the main line engages, and 2/3 of the Roman army is destroyed. At Lake Trasimene in June of 217, an entire consular army of 25,000 marches into a fog-bound defile between hills and water. Carthaginian forces hidden along the ridgeline descend simultaneously along the entire Roman column. 15,000 die in 3 hours. the consul Flaminius falls in the press. Then Cannae, August 2nd, 216 before Christ. On a flat plain near the Aufidus River in Apulia, Hannibal faces the largest army Rome has ever assembled. 86,000 men under 2 consuls. He deploys his center in a deliberate convex bulge, weakest at its core. As the Roman mass drives the center backward, the line bows inward, forming a concave pocket. Carthaginian heavy cavalry destroys the Roman horsemen on both flanks, then wheels behind the infantry. The encirclement closes. In a single afternoon, between 50 and 70,000 Romans die, the bloodiest day in the history of European warfare before the modern age. Yet Carthage cannot finish Rome. Hannibal lacks siege equipment for the city's walls. Italian allies defect to him slowly, incompletely. Reinforcements from Carthage arrive in trickles. His brother Hasdrubal brings a second army over the Alps in 207, but is intercepted and killed at the Metaurus before the brothers can unite. Hannibal holds southern Italy for 16 years, undefeated in the field, yet strategically stalemated. The war's resolution comes not in Italy, but in Africa. Publius Cornelius Scipio, who survived Cannae as a teenager, conquers Barcid Spain, then crosses to Africa in 204. He defeats Carthaginian forces, wins Numidian cavalry to his side, and threatens Carthage itself. The Senate recalls Hannibal. At Zama in October of 202, the 2 greatest generals of the age meet. Scipio neutralizes the elephant charge by opening lanes in his infantry. Numidian horsemen under Massinissa shatter the Carthaginian cavalry, then return to strike Hannibal's infantry from behind. Cannae reversed. Carthage sues for peace. The terms of 201 strip her of Spain, her fleet, her elephants, and her sovereignty in war. An indemnity of 10,000 talents of silver stretches across 50 years. The city on the Byrsa Peninsula endures, its harbors intact, its merchants still trading. But the power that once challenged Rome for mastery of the world has been broken at its root. The peace of 201 before Christ is designed to bleed Carthage slowly across half a century. 10,000 talents of silver, payable in annual installments of 200 talents over 50 years, should drain the treasury, cripple commerce, keep the city dependent and docile. Rome expects a slow decline. What happens instead astonishes the ancient world. Within a decade, the commercial harbor fills again. Carthaginian merchantmen, stripped of warships but not of trading vessels, resume their ancient routes. Grain from the fertile Bagradas Valley flows through the rectangular port in quantities that make Roman senators uneasy. The hinterland, that vast crescent of red earth, stretching south and west from the Byrsa Peninsula, proves inexhaustible. Olive groves planted in the 4th century now reach full maturity. Vineyards terrace the hillsides. Mago's agricultural science, refined across generations, yields harvests that fund the indemnity and still leave surplus for reinvestment. Punic merchants reappear in Aegean ports, in the markets of Rhodes and Delos, trading African grain, olive oil, garum, dyed textiles, and worked leather. The city itself prospers visibly. The residential quarters on the southern slopes of Byrsa grow denser, houses rising to 4 and 5 stories. Cisterns are enlarged. New workshops open along the harbour frontage. Pottery kilns, bronze foundries, purple dye vats fed by murex shells harvested along the coast. The population, diminished by war and the loss of overseas territories, recovers through trade-driven immigration. By the 170s before Christ, Carthage offers to pay the entire remaining indemnity in a single sum. Rome refuses. The gesture itself is the provocation, proof that the defeated city has not merely survived but flourished. Yet the peace contains a fatal clause. Carthage may not wage war without Roman permission. This restriction becomes a weapon in the hands of Massinissa, king of Numidia, Rome's loyal ally since Zama. Year after year, Numidian forces encroach on Carthaginian territory, seizing the fertile Emporia district along the Lesser Syrtis, occupying border towns, absorbing agricultural land. Each time Carthage appeals to Rome for arbitration, Roman commissions find in Massinissa's favor, or delay, or simply look away. The city's wealth grows, but its territory shrinks. Its granaries overflow, but its frontiers contract. In 153 before Christ, a Roman embassy visits Carthage. Among its members is Marcus Porcius Cato, 80 years old, veteran of the war against Hannibal. What he sees alarms him, not a broken city but a thriving one. The harbors teem with shipping, the markets overflow, the walls stand repaired and strong. According to tradition, Cato brings back fresh figs from Carthaginian orchards and displays them in the Senate, still unwilted from the short crossing, proof of how dangerously close this resurgent power lies to Roman shores. From that day forward, every speech he delivers in the Senate, regardless of its subject, ends with the same words. Carthage must be destroyed. The city on the Byrsa Peninsula cannot hear those words echoing in the Roman Curia. Its merchants count silver, its farmers press olives, its harbor pilots guide vessels through the narrow channel into the commercial port, where cranes swing amphorae from hold to quayside. The Cothan's ship sheds stand largely empty now, the fleet reduced to a handful of permitted vessels. But the circular basin still gleams under the North African sun, its engineering intact, its potential unmistakable to any Roman observer. By 150 before Christ, Massinissa's provocations finally push Carthage beyond endurance. A Carthaginian army marches against Numidian forces without Roman consent, violating the Treaty of 201. The campaign ends in disaster, the army destroyed. But the violation is what matters. In Rome, the war faction has its pretext. Cato's refrain becomes policy. The Senate votes for war. Across the water, the city that refused to die quietly now faces the consequence of its own resilience. Rome's terms arrive in 149 before Christ, and they arrive in stages, each more devastating than the last. First, 300 hostages, sons of the city's leading families, surrendered to Roman custody at Utica. Then the demand for all weapons, 20,000 sets of armor, 2,000 catapults, and countless javelins, swords, and spears are carted out of the arsenals and piled before Roman commissioners. The city strips itself bare in the hope of mercy. Then comes the final condition. Carthage must be abandoned. The population may resettle anywhere, provided the new site lies at least 15 kilometers from the sea. For a city whose identity is the sea itself, this is annihilation by another name. The response is fury. The gates close. Every workshop in the city converts to arms production. Appian records that women cut their hair to braid into bowstrings. Temples are dismantled for metal. Each day the forges produce 140 shields, 300 swords, 500 spears, and 1,000 catapult bolts. The city that surrendered its weapons now manufactures them around the clock, the glow of furnaces visible from the Roman lines. The siege lasts 3 years. Roman forces under Manilius and then Calpurnius Piso achieve little against the triple wall on the landward side. That barrier of stone and stabling, 30 feet high, still formidable. The isthmus approach funnels attackers into killing ground. It is only with the arrival of Scipio Aemilianus in 147, elevated to the consulship despite his youth, that Roman strategy finds its grip. Scipio constructs a massive mole of stone and rubble across the mouth of the commercial harbour, sealing Carthage from resupply by sea. The Carthaginians respond by cutting a new channel from the military Cothon directly to the open Gulf, launching 50 warships the Romans did not know existed. The sortie fails, but its audacity stuns even Scipio. Through the winter of 147 to 146, Scipio tightens the cordon. A fortified camp stretches across the entire isthmus. Starvation hollows the city. When the final assault comes in the spring of 146 before Christ, Roman soldiers breach the harbour wall near the commercial port and fight into the city's core. What follows is not a single battle, but 6 days of continuous urban warfare, the most terrible passage in Appian's histories. The streets climbing toward the Byrsa are narrow, flanked by 6-story residential blocks. Defenders hurl stones and firebrands from rooftops. Roman troops advance house by house, breaching shared walls with battering rams, fighting through upper floors, laying planks between rooftops to cross from block to block. Scipio orders buildings demolished systematically to clear paths for his columns. The rubble fills the streets, mixed Appian notes with the bodies of the living and the dead, some crushed beneath collapsing masonry, others still moving among the debris. The sound carries across the harbour basin. Stone splitting, timber cracking, the roar of flames fed by cedar beams and pine joists. On the 6th day, the Byrsa falls. 50,000 survivors emerge from the temple of Eshmun at the summit and are taken into slavery. The city's commander, Hasdrubal, surrenders separately. Polybius stands beside Scipio as the younger man watches the fires consume the city below. The historian records that Scipio weeps, not for Carthage, but from the recognition that Rome itself might someday face the same fate. The burning continues for 17 days. When it ends, a commission oversees the demolition of every remaining structure. The ground is formally cursed. Ancient sources claim salt was sown into the earth. Though modern excavation has found no trace of this, the story may be later embellishment. What archaeology does confirm is comprehensive destruction. Punic building foundations sheared to their lowest courses, debris layers thick with ash, carbonized grain, melted bronze, and shattered terracotta. The harbours are left to silt. The triple wall is pulled apart stone by stone. The site lies empty. Wind moves through the ruins on the Byrsa, where the temple of Eshmun stood. Weeds push through cracked cistern plaster. The circular basin of the Cothon, engineered to shelter 220 warships, holds only rainwater and silence. A city of 300,000 people has been converted, deliberately and systematically, into a monument to its own absence. For a century the promontory lies under a Roman curse. The Senate has declared the ground Sacha, consecrated to the gods below, forbidden to habitation. Grass covers the ash. Shepherds from the surrounding countryside graze their flocks where the agora once hummed with Punic commerce. The Byrsa is a low plateau of rubble and wind. but Rome cannot leave this ground empty. The position is too commanding, the harbours too useful, the African hinterland too fertile. In 44 before Christ, Julius Caesar, surveying the strategic map of his new order, decrees a colony on the site. His assassination intervenes. It falls to Augustus to execute the vision, and in 29 before Christ, the first Roman colonists arrive. 3,000 settlers, veterans and civilians, planted on the bones of the city their grandfathers destroyed. They call it Colonia Julia Carthago. The Roman engineers do not build around the Punic ruins. They bury them. The Byrsa hilltop is sheared flat, its Punic remains pushed into the slopes as fill, and a massive platform of retaining walls and compacted earth creates a new summit. Atop this artificial plateau rise a forum, a basilica, and a Capitolium dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. The grid of Roman streets runs on a strict north-south axis, indifferent to the winding Punic lanes sealed beneath meters of packed rubble. The city grows with astonishing speed. By the 2nd century of the Common Era, Carthage has become the 4th largest city in the Roman world, after Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch, with a population approaching 500,000. It is the capital of the province of Africa Proconsularis, the breadbasket that feeds Rome itself. Grain ships depart the rebuilt harbours in convoys. The old rectangular commercial basin is dredged and relined. The circular Kothon, once home to warships, becomes a tranquil ornamental pool surrounded by colonnades. The Antonine Baths, completed around 170 of the Common Era, sprawl along the waterfront in a complex covering more than 4 hectares, the largest bathing establishment outside Rome itself. Their frigidarium columns rise to 14 meters, carved from Numidian yellow marble and Egyptian granite hauled across the sea. Mosaic floors in geometric patterns of black, white, and terracotta stretch across halls where thousands bathe daily. The water that feeds these baths travels 132 kilometers from the springs at Zaghuan through an aqueduct whose arches still stride across the Tunisian plain, one of the longest in the Roman world. An amphitheatre seating 56,000 occupies a natural hollow west of the Byrsa. An Odeon for musical performances, a theatre on the hillside, a vast circus for chariot racing, the monumental infrastructure of Roman civic life accumulates layer upon layer over Punic silence. Then a different kind of voice emerges from these streets. In the late 2nd century, Tertullian writes his fierce Latin theology here, the first major Christian author to compose in that language. Bishop Cyprian is martyred in Carthage in 258, and in the late 4th century, a young man from Thagaste arrives to study rhetoric. Augustine spends years in this city, seduced by its theatres and intellectual ferment, before his conversion transforms him into the most influential theologian of the Western Church. His confessions preserve Carthage as a city of sensory temptation, crowded, loud, intoxicating, alive. By the early 5th century, Christian basilicas stand where temples to Tanit once burned with sacrifice. The city has been remade so completely that its Punic past lies not in memory, but only in the compressed earth beneath Roman pavements, sealed, silent, waiting for excavators who will not come for 1,500 years. Carthage is again a great Mediterranean capital, its harbours busy, its baths steaming, its churches echoing with Latin hymns. It has no idea that the Vandal fleet is already being assembled. In 439 after Christ, the Vandal fleet crosses from Hispania by way of Mauritania, and Geiseric's warriors enter Carthage without a siege. The city falls not to fire, but to occupation. The great basilicas become Arian churches overnight. The Antonine baths still function, the harbours still receive ships, but the Roman administrative class flees or submits. Gaiseric makes Carthage his capital, and for nearly a century the Vandal kingdom rules the western Mediterranean from the same promontory that once launched Punic Quinqueremes. The circular Kothon, silted but still recognizable, shelters the raiders who sack Rome itself in 455. Vandal Carthage is a parasite city. It consumes Roman infrastructure without maintaining it. Aqueduct sections crack and go unrepaired. Mosaic floors in abandoned villas collect dust and rainwater. The population contracts. In 534, Belisarius lands with a Byzantine army and reclaims the city for Constantinople in a single season. The Vandal kingdom collapses with astonishing speed. Justinian orders restorations, walls rebuilt, churches reconsecrated, the harbour dredged. For a century and a half, Byzantine Carthage functions as the capital of the African Exarchata, a frontier outpost of a shrinking empire. New fortification walls, smaller than the ancient Punic circuit, enclose only the core of the city. The population is perhaps a tenth of what it was under the Antonines. Churches rise on older foundations, their columns salvaged from pagan temples, their baptisteries cut into Roman floor mosaics. Then, in 698, Hassan ibn al-Nu'man arrives with an Arab army. The Byzantine garrison resists briefly, but the city falls. This time there is no occupation, no reuse. The Arab commanders recognize that Carthage's harbours make it vulnerable to Byzantine naval counterattack. They choose instead the inland site of Tunis, 10 kilometers to the southwest, as their administrative centre. Carthage is systematically stripped. Columns, capitals, marble revetment, dressed stone blocks. Everything portable travels to Tunis, to Kairouan, to the new mosques and palaces of the conquerors. The Antonine baths become a quarry. The amphitheatre's seating is pried loose block by block. Within a generation, the city is empty. Within a century, it is unrecognizable. Soil accumulates over fallen walls. Fig trees root in the cracks of Roman concrete. Shepherds graze flocks across the Byrsa hill, unaware that beneath their feet lie compressed layers of two civilizations. Medieval ships from Pisa and Genoa anchor offshore and load marble columns directly from the ruins. Cathedral records in Italy document Carthaginian stone arriving for church construction in the 12th and 13th centuries. European travellers begin visiting in the 16th century. They find almost nothing standing. A few columns, a scatter of cisterns, fragments of the aqueduct marching across the plain toward Zaguan. The site is so thoroughly destroyed that visitors struggle to believe a great city ever stood here. The French consul Jean-Émile Humbert sketches what remains in the early 19th century. Broken arches, half-buried vaults, a landscape of low mounds and scattered marble that gives no hint of the 300,000 who once lived here. The 220 warships that once filled the Kothon, the temples that once crowned the Byrsa. For over 1,000 years, Carthage exists only as a name in books written by its enemies. The Punic language is dead. No Carthaginian literature survives intact. The physical city has been dismantled, carted away, buried under wind-blown earth and the slow, patient work of roots and rain. The silence is total. deeper even than the silence that followed Scipio's fires, because now even the Roman city that rose from those ashes has itself been consumed. The peninsula returns to grass and stone, and the sound of wind off the Gulf of Tunis, holding its secrets in compressed strata that no one yet knows how to read. In 1857, a French officer named Charles Ernest Boulay climbs the Bierse Hill with a small team of labourers and begins to dig. What he finds beneath the thin topsoil astonishes him, not Punic walls, but the massive substructure of Roman Carthage, platforms of concrete and rubble that Augustus's engineers poured to level the hilltop for their forum. The Punic city lies deeper still, compressed beneath meters of Roman fill. Boulay has opened the first modern trench into a silence that has lasted over 1,000 years. In the decades that follow, Père Alfred Louis de Lattre, a white father missionary stationed in Tunis, dedicates his life to the site. Between 1878 and 1932, he excavates thousands of tombs in the Punic necropolis, recovers painted ostrich eggs, gold jewelry, scarabs, and terracotta masks from graves that date to the 7th and 6th centuries before Christ. He maps the Tophet, that haunted precinct where thousands of small urns containing cremated infant and animal remains lie beneath carved limestone stelae bearing the sign of Tanit. The sheer density of deposits stuns him. Layer upon layer, century upon century, the urns accumulate. But it is the 1970s that transform Carthage's archaeology forever. Suburban villas are spreading across the ancient site, bulldozers cutting through strata that have waited 26 centuries. In 1972, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization launches the Save Carthage International campaign, summoning teams from 11 nations. The British excavate the harbours and confirm what Appian described: the circular military Kothon with its radial ship sheds, the central island, the hexagonal basin. German archaeologists uncover the Punic residential quarter on the southern Bierse slope. Multi-story houses with plastered walls, interior cisterns, and drainage channels running beneath paved streets. American teams cut deep into the Bierse hilltop itself, revealing that Roman engineers had sliced away the upper Punic levels to create their platform. Yet fragments of Punic domestic life survive in pockets: loom weights, fish hooks, amphora handles stamped with Punic letters. The mosaics of Roman Carthage emerge in extraordinary condition: hunting scenes, marine creatures, the seasons personified in colored stone tesserae of a quality rivaling anything from Pompeii or Antioch. The Antonine baths yield sculptural fragments, opus sectile floors, and the sheer footprint of a bathing complex that once served 500,000 inhabitants. Yet the deepest revelation is absence. No Carthaginian library survives, no Punic epic, no philosophical treatise, no personal letter has come down intact. Mago's agricultural work exists only in Roman translation. Hanno's voyage survives in a Greek summary. Everything known of Carthaginian thought, governance, and self-understanding filters through Greek and Roman authors who were, almost without exception, Carthage's enemies. The physical city speaks, in potsherds, in foundation walls, in the silent rows of Tophet urns, but it speaks without words. Today the Bierse Hill is crowned by a cathedral built in 1890 and the Carthage National Museum. Below, the modern suburb of Carthage Hannibal spreads its whitewashed villas over streets that once held 300,000 souls. The circular harbour basin survives as a shallow lagoon, its outline still legible from the air. The Tophet lies open to the sky, its stele weathering slowly under Mediterranean sun. Carthage became a World Heritage Site in 1979, protected at last, though what remains is a palimpsest, Roman over Punic, modern over both, and beneath it all, the compressed memory of a civilization so thoroughly annihilated that even its own name for itself must be reconstructed from inscriptions on stone. The stones remember what the books cannot. They remember the weight of ships sliding into the Kothon, the heat of furnaces in the metalworking quarter, the small urns placed carefully in sacred earth. They remember a city that mastered the Western Sea for 6 centuries and was erased in 6 days. And they wait, still, for the questions that have not yet been asked. Thank you for joining this journey through the full arc of Carthage, from Phoenician anchorage to silent ruin to rediscovery. If these stories of the ancient world speak to you, subscribe to the channel so you never miss what comes next.